Welcome to CosmoFactory, a podcast by Cosmoprof Worldwide Bologna, where we explore the entire cosmetics, personal care, and fragrance industry supply chain. I'm your host, Deanna Utrusky, and here at CosmoFactory, we look beyond the trends to discover the ideas, initiatives, and innovations that are truly advancing beauty. Let's get started. Today's CosmoFactory episode is worth revisiting. My interview with Alex Lorestani originally aired in January of 2025 and is a good conversation to listen back to while the CosmoFactory team works behind the scenes to refresh this podcast for you. And if you're looking for more informative and inspiring cosmetic industry conversations, you will find the full CosmoFactory archive of more than 100 episodes on your favorite podcast platform and at cosmoprof.com. We will be back soon with all new episodes. In the meantime, please enjoy my conversation with Alex. This episode is about designing polypeptides. It's about the progression of biotech in beauty. It's about topical and ingestible ingredients, about skincare, wellness, longevity, and more. For today's episode of the CosmoFactory podcast, I am speaking with Alex Lorestani, co-founder and CEO of Geltor. Alex, welcome to CosmoFactory.
Thanks, Deanna. It's so great to be back with you.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. I'm so glad you could make time and speak with me today. Um, in the cosmetics and personal care industry, it's certainly at this point in history, if I may, biotech ingredients, including peptides and proteins, are reasonably common. And this was not the case 10 years ago. Geltor, the company you lead, is generally thought of as one of the first, if not the first company to bring biotech collagen to the cosmetic ingredient marketplace. So I'm hoping we can start with a quick history of the company, sort of when, how, why did Geltor get started?
Yeah, it's hard to believe that Geltor got started more than 10 years ago now. And my co-founder and I uh, actually met more than 10 years ago when we were graduate students in the molecular biology department at Princeton. And it was the summer of CRISPR, as I like to say. This was a moment in time when, for people like us, it became clear that like the future of what biology could do was going to be really, really different from what had been possible before. And in particular, uh, it, it it sort of opened up the possibility of designing biology in a way that was much more, tunable and exciting and creative than what had ever been possible. And that like over the next few years of working in the lab together and sort of sharing ideas, solving problems, stuff like that, became a conversation about how we could go and build a big protein company. That's kind of what we got excited about. That was in the summer of 2015. That's when we actually started the Geltor Inc. And what we really set out to do initially was bring together the power of you know making proteins in a fundamentally different way through fermentation and applying sort of the emerging tool set, which relative to what we have access to today was super rudimentary, but the emerging tool set for designing proteins, sort of like building them for a purpose. So that's where things started. And I have to admit, like, we really didn't know anything about the cosmetics and personal care industry. We were kind of in the backyard of some of the biggest players, being in central New Jersey. But it was not something that, we were expert in by any means. So our sort of exploration of the beauty and personal care industry really began like once we started talking with anybody that we thought like could be a customer. And that's where we found this amazing fit between uh, where we saw our customers feeling the industry heading, sort of like where consumers were heading, and what biotechnology could actually deliver. So that's a little bit about how we got started. It's been a wild journey and a really exciting one since then.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. And I mentioned collagen, and as you have suggested, consumers today are very understanding of this protein. Everyone working in beauty certainly understands that our bodies produce or synthesize collagen as the same way that other animals do. And biotech is often used now as an alternate source of ingredients. So it's easy to imagine using biotech to make collagen, right, rather than sourcing it from cows or fish or other creatures. Um, but you're not quite making like a mimic of an animal collagen or a fish collagen, for example. Can you talk to us about this idea of protein design?
Yeah, absolutely. So, in exploring sort of what customers' problems were, one of the things that we found was customers weren't, particularly wed to the types of collagens that existed in animal sources. They were really interested in these materials because of their ability to deliver some kind of functionality or some kind of activity. So what we said was, all right, like if we weren't limited to, type 1, type 3 collagen, the types of collagens that are most abundant in animal tissues, which are, sort of extracted through a sort of gruesome process, frankly. What if we could first just take a step back and look at all of the collagens in nature? In just humans alone, we have around 100 different types of collagen molecules. There are kind of like 28 different families, and each family has a few different members, so it's around 100. So we said, all right, um, what if we could explore that for the collagens that had the ability to go and deliver different benefits, right? Whether those are benefits specific for a skincare application or a hair care application, or go down the list. So that was where we started, and that was a natural jumping off point because our customers and consumers were already familiar with collagen conceptually, and this was, I think, a really nice bridge from the traditional animal derived sources of collagen to using biotechnology to basically unlock collagens that could not be unlocked in any other way, right? So
Mhm.
one of the first collagens that we focused on was human type 21 collagen, which is a signaling collagen as opposed to type 1 and type 3, which are scaffolding collagens. So that was like the first example of how we could use, computational tools to identify uh, collagen sequences that had the ability to deliver particular types of performance and use fermentation to unlock those at scale, even though, in humans, type 21 collagen basically disappears after you're like 3 years old. So like that was, the first step. And over time, we found consumers and our customers becoming more and more familiar with biotechnology and the ability of it to deliver things that were fundamentally different from what could be sourced in nature and what could be found in nature, and therefore interested in how we could design new things with proteins as sort of the substrate for that design. So, if you think about the Humacol 21 example as really using biotech to make the inaccessible accessible, um, the approach that we're now spending a lot more time on with our customers is how can we take a perceivable consumer benefit and work backwards from that into a protein design that we can then make through fermentation and produce. So that's been the journey. And right now we're finding certain segments of the market to be more of a fit for designer proteins, and other segments of the market to be more of a fit for sort of the best of what nature has to offer and what can be unlocked through biotech. And that's been a part of the adventure.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate your sharing that because that last observation you made is very much, something that has taken you some time to learn. And I very much want to hear from you today, Alex, about more of these highlights, right? What have you learned from 10 years of making biotech ingredients for beauty? I've gotten to interview some folks here on the podcast who have been doing something like this for 2 years or just getting started. So I know that you've learned a lot, not only about biotech ingredient design, but also about biotech ingredient design specifically for cosmetics and personal care
Yeah.
applications. For listeners who might be trying to do something similar or looking to partner with companies like yours, when you look back at this decade, what are some of the most valuable things you've learned?
I think the first thing that you know we've seen compound over the past 10 years is the focus on performance. There's sort of like, constant discussion of, different certifications and like different types of language that, we use or don't use. But, at the end of the day, uh, the thing that is driving consumers to choose one product over another, like over and over again, is, whether it's like really working for them. Um, and, this in the beauty and personal care industry has only, I would say, accelerated over the past like 3 to 4 years. I think a lot of that actually has to do with proliferation of drugs like Ozempic, right? Like the bar for performance has been raised, and what is more in your face than uh, body composition? It is like your face is what's more in your face than body composition, like hair and so these are the frontiers for materials that can help people get the results that they're looking for, and their expectations for what good performance looks like has been completely transformed in the past few years
Yeah, I mean,
by
it sounds like, we think a lot about like consumer expectations. We think about perceived benefits when we do,
yeah,
sort of, consumer perception studies. We're literally thinking
yeah,
about perceived benefits. And that's so often talked about in the brand space, but it's interesting to hear not only from an ingredient company that you're seeing those benefit expectations shift, but
yeah,
also like you're developing new ingredients and
yeah.
it's sort of affecting you that far back in the supply chain. It's super interesting, but go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I think, that is the biggest shift that we've seen in the past 10 years. Like the bar now is for when we share, when we're working with a partner and they're performing a clinical study on, some of our products, or performance study, it basically needs to be, the expectation is that this is going to be the best performing product that they have ever seen, because of these advances in technology and the understanding that something fundamentally different can be delivered.
Yeah.
So it has like, that started out like in a small way 10 years ago, people, the first true believers, seeing the potential of biotechnology to really move the needle on performance. But that has, in an incredibly exciting way, accelerated significantly in that time. So that's where we're spending a lot of our time. And again, just like for us, there's a lot of talk around, and it's important, sort of like the words that we use and sort of you know the way that the ways that these products are framed, but performance is supreme,
Yeah.
and that's where we think biotechnology can really make a difference.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's so interesting too, because, I think in years past, a consumer wants something that works well as sort of their favorite product. But as you've suggested now, consumers and brands are looking for something that actually is different. And I think that's a real opportunity here. And you've mentioned the idea of terminology and certifications a little bit in your remarks there. Neither you or I don't think qualify as a regulatory specialist, but companies in the biotech space do sort of struggle at times with language. Can they say animal friendly? Can they say this is vegan? You've kind of suggested that that's less relevant, right, than efficacy, which
Yeah.
we know is sort of chief. Efficacy, safety, quality, these things are paramount in beauty. But do you have any advice? Should other companies be pursuing certifications? Should they, you know, put vegan on their labels? What matters?
Yeah, well, I think it's I obviously I just sort of said, like, I think performance is supreme, but
Yes.
oftentimes like some of the most complicated parts of bringing these things to market, whether it's the ingredient or the end product, are things like nomenclature and certifications. And um I I think that's just that's just the way that the that's just the way that things kind of work today.
Yeah, we need to talk about
But
it somehow.
yeah, we need to talk about it somehow. Like things need to be labeled, somehow. And I think that, there are a set of, third parties that can help companies navigate this that I think are gaining credibility with brands. I think the example of like vegan is really interesting because, vegan can mean something different to, one person compared to another person. And even the certifying bodies like have some variation in terms of how they approach it, and retailers have some differences in terms of how they approach it. So, what we think is really powerful about like Joltar's biotech platform and biotech more broadly is the ability to bring uh, perfect traceability to how these products are made. For example, the fermentation process that we use has what we refer to as fully defined media, which is just kind of like a complicated way of saying like we know exactly what is going in to this product. There's no sort of mystery powder that is going in and doing something special. It is a perfectly defined list of ingredients that are going in and feeding the fermentation, and then we know exactly what is coming out of that fermentation. So, you know, biotech, I think, is a great way for brands that are prioritizing things like traceability and the ability to get these certifications that kind of relate to that, relative to what you can get from extracts from plants or animal extracts, obviously.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's helpful to think about. And it strikes me that the years you have spent in the cosmetic ingredient business now coincide nicely, right, with the rise of nutraceuticals in beauty. And we know many topical ingredients make sense as supplements. Do you have a perspective on nutraceuticals? Have you learned anything? Is there something we want to know from you on this?
Yes. I mean this is one of the two big frontiers that we see in beauty and personal care. Um, I think so much of the past 10 years from a just market driver perspective has been driven historically by, premiumization and like geographic expansion of these products globally. And that has taken place within the existing, product set, hair care, body care, skin care applied topically. What, we are, really focused on as a frontier are like the biggest beauty brands expanding how beauty is delivered to their customers uh, through ingestible products, like the nutraceutical ones that you mentioned, also through more medical aesthetic type products. So this is a sort of systematic expansion of like these beauty products offered by these beauty brands rather than by a right now, like really fragmented set of players. It's sort of like, the companies that make products they're applying topically, and then there's, I think it's like hilarious actually that the, biggest like beauty uh supplement companies are the ones that make like the Clorox wipes that, I buy at Costco and like Purina dog food. Like that is such a disconnect. I would think from, the way that most brands are thinking about the experience that they can bring to their consumers. And then similarly, medical aesthetics, like that wall between like the doctor's office and like Sephora is it's already kind of come down, and I think that we're figuring out what those businesses that sort of emerge are going to look like. So
Yeah.
we're super excited about this. What I'll say is on the nutraceutical side specifically, since that was your question, it is a totally different um, ball game from a science perspective, right?
Mhm.
So the kind of so from a product design and from a manufacturing perspective, everything that we make is food grade, right? Like we do all of this in a food grade manufacturing process. Like the sort of front end of this is really set up nicely for ingestible products. But when we start going down the road of developing the science for ingestible beauty products, this is a completely new frontier. We had to go and run the biggest ever clinical study in ingestible skincare just to set a baseline, right? Like, what are the existing benchmarks doing in the market, right? From a like rigorous clinical study perspective, and what can our product do relative to them and placebo. So it is I would say a much more complex effort from a scientific affairs perspective. But like, I was an MD PhD student when I started the company. This is kind of uh, what excites us when we see a big opportunity in the market and the chance for science to kind of, pave a big sort of like path through that. Um, yeah, really, really looking forward to the next few years in that segment.
Yeah, no, and you're certainly not the only one in the industry to notice that overlap now of beauty and health, as it were. And that's, been a very strong line, especially in the States, for regulatory reasons, but even in the States now, it's like you said, that wall is really coming down. And I think that moves us into really what we think of as the wellness movement, right? And all things longevity certainly fit in there. I do want to mention a previous CosmoFactory episode. We've covered longevity several times, but one example is an interview I had with Dr. Anna Mandanova. That was episode 73. And she and I talked about NAD plus in particular. It's a molecule that our industry and biologists more widely are researching for its role in longevity. I want to think a little bit about this with you, Alex, insofar as you've said there's an exciting new frontier here, really. How is sort of longevity, wellness, even like skin health affecting protein design? Are you going to create new things because this sort of category has opened up in beauty?
Yeah, absolutely. We are. We're doing that right now. And I think that when I think of cosmetics, like I think that's like the first longevity category, right? Like I think going back 100 years. It's like I think that the tools that we have are changing, but going back to like Elizabeth Arden, right? Like, these are like themes that have, been a part of the beauty and personal care industry, since its kind of like modern inception. So, we are excited to be a part of that work to like advance the science in this space. And for us, like, really getting to the bottom of uh how do we what are like I think of them as like longevity destinations in skincare, because I think that we're as a field even just trying to figure out like what does success look like for longevity in cosmetics? It's an extremely like molten field right now. I think some companies are doing a great job of like finding a destination and going super deep. So, we are, I'd say right now, like very focused on the science and our ability to design proteins to make an impact, with rigorous science. But that's one of the areas that we're quite active in.
Yeah, yeah. And, we've talked a bit about collagen. Certainly, this is a very chic protein in beauty right now, but there are
Yes.
many other proteins of relevance in beauty. As we wrap up our interview here, I want to think about elastin. Will you tell us about this protein, maybe why it's compelling in beauty, um, and what makes biotech elastin any different from something we could get from a different source?
Yeah, well, you know what? Maybe to start the story, like one of the reasons why, we started working on this was the fact that it is unlike collagen, which is pretty straightforward to source from animals. Elastin is really, really difficult to source from animals. One reason is, relative to collagen, it's actually really rare in the extracellular matrix or skin of animals. So there's just not a whole lot of it to work with. And then from a material perspective, it has different properties which don't make it as amenable to the types of chemical extraction processes that have been used historically when you're taking this stuff from animal tissue. So we thought it was fascinating that collagen, elastin, and keratin, these are kind of like three pretty common materials of interest in cosmetics and personal care, but one of them, elastin, was pretty inaccessible. So we started with that as a point of interest. We then, as I would say, the sort of longevity, wellness, and beauty, Uber category began to form, saw a lot more attention being paid to elastin, and sort of, in particular, because while collagen has like a pretty short half-life, there's a lot more turnover and sort of like regeneration of collagen in human tissue just as a baseline. The half-life of elastin is like 75 years. So like the elastin that that I have was the elastin that I was born with. The elastin that I'll have when I'm 75 will be pretty much the elastin I was born with, and that means it has like a really different pattern of accumulating damage and sort of tools that you need to develop to ultimately like repair it, hopefully. So it's a fundamentally different approach, and changes to elastin have a significant impact on like the appearance of skin. So that led us to start to dive much more deeper on how can elastin be used to stimulate the production of more elastin in the skin, because that would be a pretty powerful tool to have in the toolkit. Similarly, like elastin has actually an important role in hair follicle, structure and physiology. So, we are right now, really like in the same way that we pioneered, the sort of like collagen category in biotech for beauty and personal care, really working to do the same thing with elastin and a few other molecules. So it is not our like I would say biggest product yet, but it is absolutely the fastest growing one. And it's been an exciting time to really push the science and the depth of our understanding of what a recombinant elastin can do in skin, in hair, across a variety of situations. And we actually one of my colleagues, Jose Melo Barcelos, he recently published in Personal Care Magazine a really interesting publication on the role of elastin and the ability of Elastipure to provide benefits in postmenopausal women. So this is kind of like, we'd love to sort of like go deeper into, all right, like how can we model and look at particular groups of people where this may, be more relevant. I encourage folks to check it out. Jose did great work there.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate your mentioning that. We've had a few episodes recently that speak to what we might call the menopausal consumer specifically, and finding ingredients that have, clinical data of relevance is quite a challenge still at this point. A lot of companies are turning to classical wellness or supplement ingredients and incorporating them. Otherwise, just looking for new studies on existing skincare ingredients. So I'm glad you shared that. And I have to say, Alex, it might be a cliche expression, right? Looking backward helps us look forward. But I thank you for sharing your learnings over 10 years with us, and for being my guest today on the CosmoFactory podcast.
Thank you so much, Deanna. It's been great to, go on this journey with you over the last 10 years. And I'm looking forward to the next 10.
Thank you so much for listening. If you find the CosmoFactory podcast useful, please take a moment to leave us a 5-star review and share your thoughts so even more cosmetic industry professionals can discover the CosmoFactory. I'm Deanna Utrusky. Please join me again next Tuesday for a new episode of the CosmoFactory podcast.